Hello everyone, my name is Fear Dragon. I'm joined here by David Kim from Uncapped Games, and we're going to be talking about the new game that you've been working on. How are you doing today, David?
Yeah, very good. It's been an exciting, I guess, community summit so far, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have been working on this new game. I think a lot of people have heard rumors or like random hearings that you are working on something, but what exactly is it? How would you describe it for people right now?
Yeah, so we're trying to create an RTS game that is not just for RTS players, but also for other strategy PC gamers who may have been interested in RTS in the past, but maybe have found it too overwhelming, kind of thing, right? So we want to make an RTS for everyone.
Yeah, and what does RTS mean to you? Because I know that there's so many types of like RTS games out there. It's a really broad spectrum.
Yeah, for us, what we're trying to target is the large-scale, action-packed, fast-paced, army versus army, commander fantasy, this type of RTS game. And I guess RTS in the past meant something, right? And we're trying to take a stab to change it a little bit because we believe that might be a little bit more of a fun RTS. So in the past, I've always seen RTS as like, it's not really about the strategy of the game. It's more about kind of the execution. So like the real-time, fast-paced execution, the APM, etc. Like being able to be like multitask, like while I'm doing this, I'm also doing that, and then I'm also fighting in battles, and then while I'm fighting in battles, I'm also like building units. Like this, to me, has been kind of RTS, right? That I love, right? Because like my two, I guess, favorite games of all time are StarCraft 1 and StarCraft 2 kind of thing, right? But what we're trying to challenge a little bit is what if we had an RTS game where it's a real-time, like really emphasize the strategy, right? So I'm not saying real-time doesn't matter, like absolutely it's important, right? But what if we create a game where the real-time strategic and moment-to-moment decision-making is much more important compared to say like, and then maybe we even target and say, what about the clicks that are just required for the sake of making the game difficult to play so that there's a bigger skill differentiation? What if we take a big stab at trying to remove all of that, right? So what you're left with then is a game, an RTS game, that is real-time decision-making, real-time like moment-to-moment, say like unit micro or macro, etc. Plus, there's a lot of like strategy in terms of like, okay, how am I gonna like approach my attack? Like, am I gonna do a two-prong attack or maybe like fake out a small attack over here and then attack with my big forces? Like, this is where we kind of believe we can create something new and different, and something that we believe is really the most fun RTS that we can maybe take a stab at.
That makes a ton of sense. And even going on to what you were talking about, I know one of the things that when people hear, I think in the past they would hear like, oh, we want to make things like more accessible. We want to make things like so that people can just jump into the fun parts of maybe an RTS or whatever game. In the past, I think that was always like a really positive thing. I think sometimes now people hear that and they think, oh, are you going to remove my ability for skill expression? So like, what kind of goes into the philosophy for that? And like, how do you implement ways that people can still express their like skill level and still consistently win if they're better?
Yeah, so maybe let me answer it in two ways, right? One maybe quick way to answer it is like, we all know like in a game like StarCraft 2, for example, the best pro players like happen to be Korean players usually, right? And we do have a couple Korean players here at the summit today too. And what kind of surprised me was I asked like, oh, like what do you think, right? And then their, I guess, first go-to was like, oh man, the mastery ceiling in this game is like crazy high, right? But this is an interesting way to look at it because like what you're saying, like we have taken a very like big stab at removing all of these kind of tedious clicks is what I like to kind of call it, right? So on the one hand, we were kind of worried like maybe some RTS players might think like it's like accessible, like approachable, etc. But like we had kind of a opposite result from the pros, right? And then on the flip side, we've had plenty of examples like internal playtesting, even at the summit, or even external playtests with our friends, family, previous colleagues, etc., where people who are brand new to RTS have seen a lot of success in actually being able to play and experience the core fun of the game, which is very rare in the RTS genre from my experience, right? So that's one example. And then the second is our approach is very different from what I guess other developers in the past have claimed in terms of accessible, approachable, etc. For us, approachability is not the goal. Our main goal is how do we create the most fun to play RTS, and that's how we'll make kind of the most, I guess, played RTS, etc. Right? So like one example from I guess just yesterday is someone brought up like, oh, isn't the pace of the game a little too fast? And I worry because that's not making the game approachable, kind of thing, right? And then I asked something like, oh, but do you like the pace of the game? Like, is it fun, right? And then they're like, oh, absolutely. Like, I love the pace of the like, it's really fun for me, right? So I'm like, yeah, that's the core of it, right? We will never make a change to our game just to make it more, I guess, easier to play. Our goal is like, yeah, like from the point of view of what's most fun, like, is this fun or is that fun? Like, we will only make changes based off this decision kind of thing, if that makes sense.
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah. I think it's such a great example too, because that's one of the things that came to mind for me when I was playing the game is, wow, it's so fast paced. Is that going to be a problem? But you're absolutely right. It just it ends up being very fun in that kind of sense. And I think kind of related to that is another really common topic for RTS games right now is kind of lethality. And there's like, I'm sure you know, like the broad spectrum of like how lethal are units, how quickly do things die, like forming attachments. What's kind of your design philosophy on that in this?
Yeah, so that's like an ongoing discussion for like decades now, I think, right, in the RTS space. So my thought has always been a little bit different from the majority, I guess, right? And I believe that we have been proving out at a very small scale why what I believe is could be a good thing too, kind of thing, right? But just at a high level, I think there is two kind of ways to look at it, right? Fast-paced game is more, and high lethality game is much more difficult because it's so fast-paced. I can't do everything, etc. Right? But on the flip side, because no one can do everything, even the very best players in the world, they're making mistakes, and making mistakes is okay. It's part of the game. So in some ways, it's actually making it a little bit less hardcore kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
But on the flip side, if you look at games like Company of Heroes, Warcraft 3, that are, I think, the slower paced, more methodical, small scale type of games, right? But in these games, oftentimes it's like, oh, I lost one of my 3 squads of units right at the start of the game over, right? Like, it's just like, that's so punishing. It's very hardcore in its own way, right? So in terms of how hardcore or how not hardcore a RTS game is, I don't think it's as simple as saying, oh, like low lethality, less hardcore, this is more, like, you can't make this kind of, it really depends on the nuances and the specifics of how that game is played, right? And for us, it's, again, it's more like, we really think there is a game made to be, game to be made out there where we are chasing after this army commander fantasy, right? Because if you look at all the popular PvP online games out there, like MOBAs, FPS games, etc. It's always like you are the hero fantasy type of games that are the biggest right now, right? And on the flip side too, like if you look at it from teams versus a solo play point of view, we're aiming for like 1v1 or 2v2 type of these two are the modes that we are focusing on, and these two are the only ways to play the game even, right? Versus a lot of the popular online PvP games out there are focusing more on bigger teams kind of thing, right? So we want to provide something new and a little bit different in that whole, I guess, PvP online game space as a whole too. Yeah.
No, that absolutely makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And just going into the whole PvP online thing, I think as soon as you start talking about like multiplayer and competitive modes and everything, I think one thing that always is going to be coming to mind this day and age is esports and stuff. And I will say, obviously, people watching this won't have known this, but one thing that's really struck me about this whole entire experience is there's been a heavy focus on the game itself and not a lot of discussion about, oh, like, and we're planning this big competitive circuit and everything. So like, what is kind of your design philosophy around how you're approaching esports? And how does that even affect like what you maybe do inside the game?
So for us, I guess so for me, I have kind of a personal kind of bias or story, etc., like whatever you want to call it, right? And that one is a lot of us felt this way, not just the developers on StarCraft 2, but also players, also esports people, etc., right? Back in the day, like this is like almost 20 years ago now, I think, right? Back then, we all thought like the best esport is something that looks similar to the best, I guess, sport, right? And then so my quick example always here is like, how many people who love and who watch like every game of NFL like actually go out and play football kind of thing, right? So, but in games, in hindsight, after like trying that method for such a long time and trying to make that work, we realized in games it's different. For games specifically, it's like if I don't play the game or if I've never played the game, I never watch the esport. This is kind of like the norm and the majority or whatever, right? So long way to say, before we used to think like, oh yeah, we gotta create this game where nobody can do what the real good people can do kind of thing, right? Whereas now, like my mind has shifted kind of all the way the other way of like, if this is a competitive game, if this is a fun to watch competitive game, which we think we are, then the only important remaining factor is if it's the most widely played game, then that's the biggest esport kind of thing, right? So long way to say, this is why we're starting with like, how can we make the most fun for the majority type of RTS game? And then that's gonna create probably the most widely played game. And then that's gonna lead into like very naturally into the biggest esport kind of thing, right? Granted, if everything goes well, kind of thing, right? Yeah.
No, I love that answer. And actually even leads a little bit into something else I wanted to ask you about, which is kind of tied to what you just actually said. You've been now like doing this stuff in the game industry for a while, like leading the charge on design and everything. How have you been approaching this game? Maybe different from like some of the past games that you've worked on. I know most people will think of StarCraft 2 and everything.
Yeah, so for me, just at the personal level, like I want to say maybe during Heart of the Storm development or maybe shortly after, like since that time, I've always wanted to kind of take a stab at like, oh, like StarCraft 2 is amazing. Like it is actually my favorite game of all time still out of all the games that are out currently, right? But it's just so hard to play, right? Like even for me, like I'm like a, whatever, like played for 30 decades almost, right? And like I would say like I'm not a pro level player, but I'm quite competitive. Like I played at quite a high level. Like I got to GM, etc. Right? Yeah. But even as someone like this, I'm thinking, yeah, but like this really isn't for everyone, right? It's like a game today where you have to spend like 5 years to practice all these like weird drills to increase your APM. Like this just doesn't feel like fun to. I guess the masses, right? It's like, to me, it's great. Like I love it, right? Like you love it, right? But we're kind of in the minority if we're talking about all PvP strategy gamers even in the world, kind of thing, right? So I've always wanted to take a stab at like, what does that most fun to play RTS kind of look like? Not the most skill based, not the most esport like showing off your skill as a pro gamer, etc. Like based game. So like I've always been thinking about this for the longest time kind of thing, right? And I've had some chances to try out certain things and then refine certain things, but here it's like it's like the past, we've been going for a little less than 3 years now, and we've been like heads down focusing on the game and making this type of game, right? And this has just been like a blast, right? Oh, sorry, did I answer the question? I kind of went on a tangent.
You did. Sorry. Keep going, please.
Yeah, okay. So this, like I've kind of been wanting to do something for the past like 10 decades. I've had like so many ideas in my head on like what to try in what order, etc. And being able to do that with a team of like kind of experts in these other sub-disciplines that like I don't know anything about, like engineering. I don't know anything about art, etc. Right? Like this has been like so amazing of a, I guess, journey, right? And then seeing kind of the reactions today. Hopefully the alpha testing goes well, etc. This is kind of my, I guess, happy place, I guess, right? Yeah.
That's so great to hear, and it's so great to hear that you're enjoying it, and I've definitely been enjoying the game as well.
Cool.
Don't want to keep you here for too long, but I do want to give you a chance to say anything that you want to tell people who are looking forward to this game in the future and everything. Obviously, at this stage, people can't really play the game or even like see too much about the game. So what would be your kind of parting words for people who are looking forward to seeing more of it?
Yeah. So my only ask is this, right? I do think it's very important to keep an open mind because like time and time again, we see this common trend, I guess, especially among RTS players, if anyone comes in with kind of preset expectations of like, oh, like this must work this way because it's always been done that way in RTS, then they struggle a lot, like both in terms of trying to understand where we're coming from and what we're trying to achieve, but more importantly, maybe like they don't get as good at the game, like like maybe easy example is this, right? Say like a master's level StarCraft player that we know, like a former colleague, like he came in with like really like a lot of like expectations on like how an RTS has to be, right? And then we have like a diamond level player coming in. These two, they're like close friends, and then they play together a lot. And then he didn't, right? Like so like the diamond player actually learned to play the game like super quick, like within less than a few hours of playing, like he's like doing all kinds of like crazy like multitasking moves kind of thing, right? And then he's like, oh, this is great. Like I couldn't do this in StarCraft 2 because I was so focused on all these other things, but now I can execute like what the pros can execute kind of thing. But on the flip side, it's like, oh, like this person almost looks like he's like a silver level or like a gold level. And then the reason is always been very consistent. Like because it's not like the person is not coming with an open mind, because like he's getting so caught up on the details of like, wait, this must be like this, like what's the reason why like it's not like this or like that. So like he's not really focusing on learning and practicing the game, right? So this is the main ask for everyone who tries our game for the first time is please keep an open mind. Like not only will you see what we're trying to do better, but like you'll actually play better kind of thing. So like this is the, I guess, the big one thing that we all always like to say.
Yeah, that's absolutely makes a lot of sense. And I will definitely echo that sentiment, having now experienced it, that I think I've seen the differences in people who came in the first couple hours, they just quickly pick things up because they were ready to abandon previous ideas and everything. Well, thank you so much, David.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, guys, look forward to Uncapped Games, a new game that's going to be coming out, a new RTS, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.